So let's cross back to Nasrec now. And joining us from our studio there is Presidential Spokesperson Vincent Magwenya. Mr. Magwenya, thank you so much for joining us. I've got to ask you, yesterday everyone was wondering who would take the presidency of the ANC. Are you able to tell us if President Ramaphosa was quite worried himself?
Well, Sally, I'm not quite sure why people were wondering, because if they had followed the guidance of the branches of the governing party, they will have realized that the branches during the nomination round had expressed their overwhelming confidence in the president continuing with leading the governing party, but more importantly, continuing with the reforms, whether it be in the economic arena or the institutional reforms, in the rebuilding of the state. And so if you follow that guide, there will have been no reason to wonder as to whether the president will emerge or not.
I think the reason I'm asking you is because we literally have people on record, voting delegates, prominent voting delegates, who said, I will vote with my conscience. Others saying, I will vote as my branch has told me to do. So I think that there was a lot of uncertainty. My question is whether the president was at any stage worried about victory.
No, the president has always been consistent in saying the process of electing leadership for the governing party is a branch-based process. He will subject himself to that process. And as I've alluded or mentioned, if we look at that nomination round, the president had overwhelmingly been nominated by the branches. So in that regard, the president was not worried. He was energized, he was enthused by the fact that the process, rightfully so, belonged to the branches, and his was to follow that process as it has been designed by the governing party to factor the expressed wishes of the branches.
So we know that the president won the ANC presidency this time round by a much bigger margin than in 2017. He also has a majority of people within the top 7 who we know are very in support of him. There are lots of calls from business, from many different sectors, that we want to see a slightly different next few years from the president. That my question to you is, given that he seems to have more support within the party, does this give him more freedom to take bolder action at government level?
Well, the president has always had the freedom to fulfill his mandate within the constitutional framework and parameters that guide his work. We've noted the perception around the fact that he appears to be indecisive and so on and so on. But if you look at the facts, Sally, with respect to the state of government when the president ascended to office, the kind of damage, if I may put it that way, that he inherited, that had been inflicted upon various state institutions during that awful era of state capture, the president worked very decisively in rebuilding those institutions, ensuring that institutions that support our democracy are well enabled with leadership that will understand the constitutional mandate of those institutions and who will lead effectively in the turnaround of those institutions. So SARS, for example, comes to mind. The NPA is one such example. The Hawks is one such example. So the president is going to continue with a greater degree of urgency and pace in ensuring that those institutional reforms are sustained. The president will continue focusing on ensuring that we continue to rebuild our economy through the reforms that he has initiated. And he does want government to operate with a sense of urgency, it be resolving energy challenges, improving service delivery, and pressing ahead with those reforms.
Is it likely that the president will reshuffle his cabinet? My understanding is the Secretary General position, which the Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula has won, is a full-time position within the ANC.
Well, matters of cabinet reside within the realm of the president's prerogative in terms of when and how he chooses to exercise that prerogative. Safe to say that it will be prudent at some point for the president to review his team and to assess the performance of his team and come to a conclusion on whether he remains satisfied with the performance of his team, or if his team requires some kind of change or recapacitation, whichever way you term it. But it will be a step that's necessary in the process as he presses on with the reforms.
Going into the conference, we were expecting the ANC's Integrity Commission to release their report into President Ramaphosa, and then we were told it would be delayed until the conference. What was in that report? Have you seen it? Has it been released to the president? Was it released at the conference at all?
Well, that's a matter for the governing party to communicate on. I'm not mandated to communicate on that issue. However, I will say that from the president's perspective, he's satisfied that he has engaged the required due process in terms of the governing party requirements with respect to the matter. The report will be presented to conference, or will be dealt by the incoming NEC when it resumes its duties. But the nature of the contents or the details of that report will only be revealed at that time. The president, though, remains satisfied that he's cooperated with the Integrity Commission, as well as other agencies that have been tasked with investigating the matter. As he has always said, he will subject himself to due process, and he will support that due process, and he expects those investigations to be conducted with a large degree of no fear or favor.
Has the president actually seen the Integrity Commission's report into Phala Phala?
He's aware of the report, Sally, yes.
Okay, but he hasn't read it, or has he?
He has been finished with the report.
I see. So he has the report, and just let me get it absolutely clear. Did you say that the report will be discussed during conference or at a later stage by the new NEC? What's the process?
No. My understanding is that the report has been deferred to the next leadership of the NEC, and that's when the report will be discussed and processed. The president has been provided with a copy of the report, and as I said, the president is satisfied that he fully cooperated with that side of due process as it pertains to the requirements of the governing party.
Let's talk about what has happened in the run-up to the conference, and that, of course, was former President Jacob Zuma launching this private prosecution against Cyril Ramaphosa. And, you know, it was fairly much condemned by many legal voices who said it didn't really make much sense. Over the weekend, we saw the state attorney coming out saying in this nollie prosecute that was launched, that was issued by the NPA in regard to Billy Downer and Jacob Zuma's attempt to prosecute him, it does not include the president. So what you're doing is nonsensical. But there was a deadline that the state prosecutor gave Jacob Zuma to withdraw his action. To your knowledge, has the presidency received any communication from Jacob Zuma as to whether he is withdrawing this private prosecution?
Sally, there was communication that was received from Mr. Zuma's legal team. Subsequent to that, the Office of the State Attorney has responded to that communication, which, amongst other points raised, was a request for an extension on today's deadline. That request was granted. with the expectation that Mr. Zuma will unconditionally withdraw the summons that he has issued and also withdraw the action that he has initiated, the nolle prosequi action. It remains our position and that of the President that the action is frivolous. The summons were hopelessly substandard, and we still maintain that this is an abuse of the private prosecution process. We still maintain that the motives were more political rather than the pursuance of the interest of justice and the rule of law. And we hope that Mr. Zuma will recognize his error in this regard, which is an error in law, but also which is an error that could be costly with respect to the expenditure of public funds that will be dedicated in defending this matter.
What makes you believe that former President Jacob Zuma's motives were political?
Well, Sally, first of all, the timing of this action was problematic in the sense that this action was initiated on the eve of the commencement of the conference of the governing party. Secondly, the sort of substandard nature of the summons shows that there was no proper consideration of whether the action is aligned or is compliant to the provisions that guide private prosecution. It appeared as if to be a rushed job, if you like, to gain maximum cheap PR points, but also somehow to influence in some way or form, even though it's not quite clear how, the outcomes of political processes taking place here at Nasrec. So for that reason, we contend that, or argue that the motives may have been political. Otherwise, if necessary considerations with respect to the law, with respect to the required process, for example, getting a valid nolle prosequi certificate that relates to the actual crime committed, if those considerations were applied properly without any haste, there will have been a recognition that the action will be invalid. However, there was this sort of haste and rush to launch the action. And the timing was concerning, considering that there was an exchange of correspondence between the President and Mr. Zuma last year around August, where this matter was raised and responded to by the President, not only with respect to acknowledging the matter or the complaint that Mr. Zuma was raising on the conduct of advocates Down and Bredenbach, but the President went further to inform Mr. Zuma of the action he had taken, which was to request Minister Lamula to refer the matter to the Legal Practice Council, which is a legally available mechanism for such matters to be addressed, to then end up with an action of this nature simply because you do not agree with the steps that the President took, and then allege that the lack of action as you see it constitutes a crime, was just rather, bizarre to say the least.
We know that the NEC is going to be elected this evening. We also know that Cyril Ramaphosa has very much pushed for renewal within the party. However, within his top 7, we have Nomvula Mokonyane, who was named in the state capture report, and also Gwede Mantashe. Both of those individuals, there were questions, very serious questions, raised around state capture in connection with their names. How compromised does the President feel with people like that so close to him within the party?
Sally, one of the key distinguished features of our democracy is that it is a constitutional democracy. It is a democracy that is firmly rooted in the rule of law. So therefore, in cases where there are issues pertaining to individual conduct at a particular time, the expectation is that those issues will be dealt with and fully ventilated through the necessary law enforcement agencies or other bodies with the necessary capacity to investigate those issues. So as things stand, there are no particular actions against some of the individuals that you mentioned. Should there be action, due process will have to be allowed to run its course. And the President has been quite consistent in this regard that where there are matters that require investigation, those matters must be investigated and they must be resolved. So we cannot comment much on perceptions until such time those issues are attended to by the qualified state agencies that will investigate those issues and get to the bottom of those matters.
And finally, I have to ask, it's been a very intense time for the President. Of course, there's still many challenges that will have to be tackled. But is he going to be taking a holiday at all over the festive season?
Well, Sally, you know, the job of the President by its nature doesn't allow the President to take a holiday as such, because he never stops being a head of state. So wherever he is at whatever time, there are always matters of state that require his attention and that require that he attends to. However, during Christmas and the subsequent period between Christmas and the start of the new year, the President will take some time to spend with his family. Hopefully there won't be any major issues that will require his attention. But the principle is that there's never a day off or leave as such where he cannot be accessible or where he cannot attend to matters that require his attention. But there will be some time for him to spend with his family, like all of us, during the festive season.
Thank you so much for giving us so generously of your time this evening. Vincent Magwenya, he's the presidential spokesperson.